Can I suggest maybe it is part of the agenda in the sense that we're talking about prototype street dining decks? And this might be enfolded into that discussion.
Well, it wasn't advertised or noticed as part of the outdoor dining deck, so I don't think according to the Brown Act that we could do that. I mean,
Susan, if I may just make one short comment. I understand that it's not a part of the agenda and that I know that the next meeting is not until July. What I'm asking here is just for the use of my sidewalk with the tables.
we can't make that decision because we don't have the authority to do that without it being on the agenda and an item for us. to discuss. Again, you have to follow the rules. We have to follow the rules. And uh, while we would often like to break the rules like other people do, but that's not something that we can legally do. Thank you for being.
I'll leave it up to fate.
Okay, moving on, the next item is commission comments.
I have two
Yeah.
comments. One is, I would suggest that Doug Delly talk to staff. I don't know if you have already, but my dealings with staff is they're very accommodating. They might be able to find you a solution. But my other comment is I would like to attend the next meeting by Zoom. I realized when we first got off of Zoom that that was a very difficult thing, but all the kinks seem to have been worked out since I noticed there have been some city council members attending by Zoom. So we work with that.
We can definitely work with that. We will have to put public notice where you're at. So, what?
We put public notice in Weaverville.
Yeah, if you're in a hotel, we've got to put public notice and so I'll work with Austin and Julia on the how to set that up, but it should be no problem. There'll just be a funny public notice either at the house or so we can talk it through and walk you through all the logistics of that.
Any other comments from any other commissioners? Okay, staff comments?
No comments. I'll have a director's report at the end of the night.
Okay. So we move to approval of the minutes for May 4th, 2023. Anybody have any corrections or additions to those minutes? Not, would somebody like to make a motion to approve?
I'll move approval. I'll move approval.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I was absent.
Okay, Commissioner Wiltz is abstaining. All right, now we move to the consent calendar, which we don't have any items on, so we go to the public hearing. And the first item under our public hearings is 207, 209, 209A, and 211, the Esplanade. And I believe we have a commissioner who will recuse herself because she works for the architectural firm involved in this application. Okay, this permit is consideration of alternative colors and materials for the design permit, historical alteration permit, and coastal development permit for facade modifications in the village area. Have a staff report?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Westman, and good evening, Planning Commission. Before you this evening is an application to modify the previous permit that was approved by Planning Commission on April 6th. So the history to this is that the buildings at 207 through 211 Esplanade, it's one structure with 4 different tenants. The building was damaged on the January 5th storm. and emergency repairs and in-kind replacements have been underway. The owner has, as they've been opening walls and finding more and more damage, they've been wanting to make modifications to the facade due to the facade being potentially historic. Permits are required and planning commission review is required. And as they continue to work on this project, it continues to evolve. One item that they came up against is at the sandbar, they went to refurbish the doors. They were realizing the doors were in really bad condition. And then while they were with the carpenter's space burnt down. So the doors no longer actually exist. At first it was there, it was a structure, the strength of them was no good. And now it's not even, it's an option to replace them in kind if necessary. But so it's just been an evolving project. I'm going to go over the changes that are before you tonight. Throughout the project, they'd like to have new aluminum doors within an antique bronze color. This is similar to the door that's installed at Zelda's. And I believe that a couple of these doors have been installed. And if it were not approved tonight, they'd have to modify that back to the original design. But I think it was just an issue of having to have a door in place. The doors that they were trying to get were back ordered, and there were issues with ordering them. They'd like to reuse the Pizza My Heart window and move it next door to the Bay Bar. Our building official will be working on the energy efficiency of that and making sure it meets code in order to make that move. At the Pizza My Heart, they're proposing new aluminum doors, also in the antique bronze, and at the Sandbar, the new aluminum doors in antique bronze. On the back of the building, on the top of the slide, you can see what was approved previously by the Planning Commission. On the bottom of the slide is the back facade of what they're proposing. So there's a different layout for the windows from the lagoon. You can see there were two doors previously on the left-hand side, and now they're brought it down to one door, but a similar windows to what's being utilized in the front. And those are a great product for being next to the water. On the rear of the building, they were originally they had ceramic neolith window surrounds. Those are very difficult to install and I guess easily breakable. So as they were getting to know the product, it was not a good fit for installing over a lagoon on the back of the structure. They had asked to use Core 10 because the lagoon being under it. Staff has concerns with the environment, and Core 10 tends to drip. They do have a covering that a sealant they've used in the past that's been successful, but due to the lagoon and that risk, they've agreed to work with staff on the new condition of utilizing a similar product that will look like Core 10. It'll be a metal, but not Core 10, so that we don't have the issue with the leaking. This is a side-by-side comparison of what's happening at Bay Bar. So to the left is what was approved, the painted wood, and on the right, they're proposing a wood stain. And here is the revised streetscape. On the bottom, it's a close-up image of the new window system that they're proposing. And then these are the proposed elevations and sections. So showing the new doors and new materials for the front and back. This is the sealant that they had proposed on the Core 10 and how it would look. This is what it would look like under the staff recommendation of modifying to an alternative with it would have a coat over a metal. One recommended condition is that the roll-up window at 211 Esplanade, that's the sandbar, shall be closed from 10 PM to close of business each night and during any live entertainment. That's really to protect the hotel across the street. It's where you have a roll-up window. We actually, for the wine tasting restaurant right up the street here, when we allowed the roll-up window, we got complaints a lot because it just opens up to more noise on the street. So we're recommending that change. So staff's recommendation tonight is to approve the alternate, except substitute the use of the painted aluminum steel framed portal feature at the rear of the facade at Mai Tai Beach. And also add the condition of approval that the roll-up windows at 211 Esplanade be closed at 10 PM and during live entertainment. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
I do have
Public?
a question about the core 10, the window surround. I had trouble understanding what the real objection was to that. I talked to Brian about it. It seemed like it was just a lot of everybody trying to do everything at once. And there didn't, so they originally came in with the idea of going with the core 10, and then we came back and said, well, you should coat it because it rusts. So what if it rusts? If it would, it mentioned drips on the deck, which it's because it's their property. And if we're worried about iron oxide in the lagoon, I would be surprised that that's a real environmental effect. I'm on the environmental committee. We worry about E. coli more than chemical pollution. And it's not like they're dumping their drains in the lagoon. You're talking about an occasional drip of iron oxide, I guess, as an environmental hazard. So me, I don't get why there was all this discussion about them not being able to use core 10. Was it the environmental thing? Was it a look thing?
At first it was because of the marine environment and core 10 that it will stain buildings, it'll stain. When the application originally came in and it was reviewed, it had some core 10 over the sidewalk, and there was definite concern on the city's part of, one, the look of it, the stain dripping on the white building, and the stain on the sidewalk. So you'll notice.
So that's a city sidewalk, or is that their?
City sidewalk. So so we went around and we looked at some different buildings that have core 10. The Penny Ice Creamery on 41st Avenue has core 10. And you can see when you look at the sidewalk below it, there's a line of where that sign is from the dripping that's occurred on that sidewalk. So we had concerns as the city of drips occurring on our sidewalk. Within the lagoon, similar concern. We didn't do any environmental analysis on it, but the area is actually over the lagoon. It's going to be a trim that comes out that stands out from the building. But that portion of Mai Tai doesn't have a deck right there, so it's directly over the lagoon. And we just thought it would be smarter to use a different product that's not going to drip.
Reason again for coating?
They suggested the coating. The applicant suggested the coating as a solution so that it would not drip. When we looked at the informational data sheets regarding that product, it definitely said that it would not drip for 8 years. However, we're in a marine environment, and just that is the reason. The Planning Commission could reverse that request, but I didn't have 100% confidence that forever it wouldn't be an issue. So.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
good clarification.
Any other questions of staff before we open it to the public? The roll-up
Pizza.
window is the one you're referring to. I think-
So our building official needs to spend more time on that one.
But we could approve of that style of.
You could approve that style. If we find out that it doesn't meet the rating, then they'll have to substitute it for something else.
To substitute it for another one that looks like that. All right, seeing no one, we'll open this to the public. Anyone interested in commenting on this item? I think the applicant is here. And- Hi.
The Esplanade project from 207 through 211. We in response to the Court and Steel, if we had to be put on a set schedule instead of if the product that seals the Court and Steel lasts for 8 years and you want us to quote it every 5 years, we'd be happy to do that, or move to the aluminum, powder coated aluminum product. Either way. The roll-up doors that are being moved from the Pizza My Heart to the Bay Bar are single pane. So if we were to be allowed to use or make that opening a roll-up opening, we'd be happy to replace the door or the windows with double pane to meet the current standards.
Great.
And I can't think any other issues. Did you have any questions for me at all?
I don't have any. Does anybody else on the commission have
think
any?
I do kind of a clarification. So you said that you're okay with the powder coated aluminum window surround?
I think that's what they're talking about doing, is moving from the cord and steel to a powder coated or painted
Is that
aluminum.
our recommendation? It's RRM's recommendation, or?
It was RRM.
Or like I said, using the cord and steel and having it.
I'm just trying to make it easy on you. I don't want to have to, go through a long redesign process or whatever. So, if the powder coated aluminum is good for everyone, that sounds like the easiest, quick answer, right?
I think talking with the designer, it sounded like the solution.
And so that's consistent with your recommendations? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have it worded so they have some flexibility to come up with a good solution that's within sort of a framework. They're not being real specific on it. Okay,
And then the aluminum doors, I think in planning, they okayed an aluminum door. They didn't want vinyl windows or doors. And then Chris Shaw, I know that he's done a lot of cabinet work for all of us here in the community, and his business burnt down about 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago. And the doors that we were originally going to use got lost in that fire.
So one other question, I'm sorry. So you're okay with the staff recommendations though, in terms of the conditions?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope so. You know how it is. It's a building that hasn't been touched or opened up in 35 years or 40 years. And every time you peel something back, you discover something new. So I don't think so, no.
My understanding is that there's still additional stucco to be opened up on the back of the building, but the plan is to replace with stucco. So I think if anything changed there, it would be internal. Hopefully not design related.
And no design issues at all or updates.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I want to thank all of you also. You've all been a great partner in this project. There's been a lot of leeway on help with getting this fast tracked and done quickly and all that. And we really appreciate that. And I know the businesses down there appreciate being able to get back up on their feet. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank
Down
you all.
there this afternoon, it looks very nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they've installed a lot of the doors and everything, and I was impressed at how well it looked. And hopefully all the businesses.
I think it's gonna be a great add to the community down there. It'll be a beautiful spot when we're done.
And just one quick comment, just from a community perspective. We appreciate how nice the project looks at the end of the day. I walk down there a lot in the morning, and it's amazing that you guys are doing that much construction and then it's that clean. And so from a community perspective, it just appreciated that how well it's kept up and cleaned. And,
Yeah, we're
and like on the weekends, I think we're all trying to advertise to the community that Capitol is open and everything. And there could be a possibility with a lot of construction stuff out that people leave with their parents that it's still closed. And I think you guys do a great job in trying to help us market that things are open. So thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Yeah, do we have any Zoom people?
We do not.
Not to ask to be reminded. I remembered for one. No Zoom people. Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Anyone need to discuss it further, or are we ready for someone to make a motion? Okay. Right, right, but I think staff has the authority to, they don't have to use that exact window. They just have to use a window that looks like that. So I think we're covered with that.
Yes, I'll make sure it's clear that as long as, the window will have to comply with building code.
Okay, so do we have a second? We have a motion. All right, we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Esty, Commissioner Jensen.
Aye.
Commissioner Wild, and Chair Westman.
Aye.
Okay. So moving along, we're on item B, which is an alternative design for the prototype street dining decks in Central Village location. Up to 25 public parking spaces in the Central Village can be used for this. And we'll wait one moment while our fellow commissioner gets a chance to come back. Okay, can we have a staff report on this item?
Yes. Tonight it's the Katie show. 3 presentations. Before you this evening is a request to allow an alternative to the prototype street dining deck. In this picture here, this is really what we're talking about, is the modifications. What you're seeing here is what was permitted. The metal railing with planters in between, and they're custom metal railings and cement planters that were very heavy on purpose. And we're looking into alternatives to that this evening. So little background on this: back in December of 2021, the City Council adopted the outdoor dining ordinance for a permanent program. In July of 2022, the Coastal Commission certified that program. And in June, the City Council accepted the Coastal Commission conditions that were placed on that permit. And it was then certified, by Coastal Commission on July 14th, 2022. Planning Commission adopted the prototype standards in July 21st of 2022. So a little under a year ago. The first permit was issued this April. It was issued to Britannia Arms. And since issuing that permit, and I do see that the owner is here this evening, they've run into just the cost of what we originally thought was a reasonable cost. I think we had estimated about $25,000 for 3 spaces. The costs have gone up dramatically. And also the lead times in order to order the goods is also taking time, but it's really the cost that the reason why we're bringing this back. We want to make sure what's ever built in the right of way looks really good, but we don't want it to be overly burdensome in terms of cost to our businesses. So the railings, some of the issues were that the fabricated metal, they're installed between each planters. This requires custom built railings, which is very expensive, and a lot of coordination between, when your planters come in and the custom railings and getting the whole system together. And as I mentioned, the cost going up. And then, so before you this evening is going to be an alternative, and it's a hog wire fence or panel, which is a welded 6-gauge mesh panel that's inside a redwood rail framing for a continuous perimeter, except for the ingress and egress on and off. So we're removing the planters from actually being built into the exterior of the deck, and then having a requirement to have planters within the deck. So these materials are readily available. We went to Home Depot and made sure. And we would be specific, though, that the welded 6-gauge mesh panels be of a black powder coat, because they'll hold up better than the aluminum that we saw without the powder coat. And but they're readily available, and installation could be done by a contractor right on site, which makes it a lot easier. The planters, the approved planter is a concrete, and it weighs over 1,000 pounds once you've added the soil. That was on purpose for safety reasons. We thought that would be appropriate. Right now, the planter lead time it's greater than 10 weeks. It's they're not built in our backyard. They're quite far away, so they have to get shipped here. And then it requires, once they do get here, a forklift delivery on site, and then a forklift anytime you need to move these. So quite cumbersome. The alternative that we've come up with is we're thinking it'd be better to allow each business to pick out their planters. They should match throughout the dining deck. The idea was that they would match, but that the planters could be 30 inches to 36 inches tall, so that when you're walking by, you can actually see the plants over the railing. The railing's at 36 inches. Placed one at each corner, one at each post along the street frontage. So if there are 4 posts along the street frontage, there'd be 2 at each corner, and then the 2 internal posts, there'd be 2 there. And then 2 on either side of the entry. Planter materials could be fiberglass, ceramic, or concrete. We're actually going to change up this recommendation a little bit. Sean spent some time at a potting store today and talked to the owner there. And fiberglass, if it's around a lot of people, it can get dinged quite easily and damaged. So tonight, the one recommended change to this is to only allow ceramic or concrete, because they'll last the longest and not get damaged easily in a public setting. And then traffic safety for each of these decks will have the Public Works Director review, and she'll, on a case-by-case basis, they can require rated bollards to be placed at the end of the dining decks. So in areas where there's more traffic, they'll probably be required as part of the permit. So here are some images. We based this on the Riverview pathway design. So the hog wire is framed in by redwood. It'll be the smooth redwood, will be specific on the material list. And then this is examples of different planters that are available on this slide. These are planters that were on the website house.com. These range in price from $600 to almost $800 each. Locally, we went out and looked at some planters this is on SoCal Ave. Right after you go over Highway 1, is it called the Pot Stop? Or Pottery Planet. Pottery Planet, and they had some beautiful planters that ranged from $299 that were 36 inches tall upward, but there are quite a few around the $300 price range that would work. So the staff recommendation tonight is to allow alternate wood and wire railing and between 30 to 36 inch tall planters for the prototype street dining deck plans. And that's the recommendation. Another item that came up was that that would be great to get feedback on from the Planning Commission tonight is as owners are ordering things, we were like for chairs and all the prototype, the furniture, the timing doesn't always line up perfectly. And we've been trying to coach the business owners to just, plan to build your deck when you'll have your furniture in place and you'll have your umbrellas so that it all comes together at once. But if the Planning Commission would like us to be more flexible on that, we could get feedback on that as well. But from our point of view, this is, we're finally going to have the long-term deck in place, and they get to have it for 3 years once it's installed. And then there can be continuations on this further out, but really want it to look good where it's in the private and in the public right of way. And was thinking that they shouldn't get their occupancy until they have all the components, such as including the furniture. If they didn't have their umbrellas installed, we would not hold them up for that, but just the furniture, the deck, the correct railing. So with that, I'm open and available for questions.
They didn't have any questions.
Yeah, yes, I do. So you mentioned the hog wire. Well, first question is English ales, are they just, do they meet up the prototype standards?
No, the one that is, that's not a prototype. They'd come in for a custom approval of the deck that they had for COVID-19, which is still in the right of way. And that was denied by the Planning Commission back in December, I want to say, of last year. And there's an allowance to allow someone to keep their COVID-19 deck up as long as they're making progress on their outdoor dining permit, their building permit. So they do have a building permit in. It's been a slow process, though, getting a couple of,
Okay, thank you.
submittals on that.
Next question is, you showed the planters. I kind of assumed that the planters that we approved for the prototype were rectangular planters, but you showed round, all kinds of vessels that were count as planters, but are rectangular. Is that, we have a shape that we specify?
So the prototype design has a rectangular planter. What we're suggesting tonight is to be more flexible so that we can bring down the cost on these. So giving the business owners the flexibility to pick out their own planters, as long as we're asking that they be between 30 to 36 inches in height, that they can pick color, and the materials have to be either ceramic or concrete.
So
So
are
more
there other materials like steel or aluminum or redwood or something that you decided were unacceptable?
Yes, so the aluminum can get damaged quite easily. Also, wood needs to be continuously painted and kept up. So we're really trying to utilize, we're proposing materials that won't have to, you don't need to paint them, and they won't be damaged easily. They'll have a longer lifespan.
You're not worried about the chipping of the ceramic? As likely to be damaged?
As I said, Sean went out to the pottery store today and talked with the owner. If you want to add any.
Good evening. So to that question, I mean, if you had to say what is likely to be the most resilient material, the feedback I got from the pottery store was that concrete was probably by far and away the wisest material choice. Ceramic is an option, but yeah, it's going to be more prone to damage and probably chipping and cracking. But it's still a sturdier option, I would imagine, than the fiberglass and the Gordon steel, for example. They had options like that. I looked at them as well, and those are the two that the management there gave the most reservation on this particular use.
And finally, the hog wire metal fencing. Why do we pick something very specific? We couldn't just put it up to all kinds of metal. Why do we pick that particular design?
Due to, again, so when you're along a public street, there's a lot of wear and tear that happens. There's kids that will climb on things. We were looking at possibly doing like the steel, the cords, those get flexed really easily and start looking, they just require a lot of maintenance. So because this is in the public street, it's on city property, we're trying to find something that's cost effective as well as has a really nice look to it. And another piece of this is we thought, where this has been used along the Riverview pathway and it looks really nice. It's something that is part of our community, like repeating that within the village seemed appropriate.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Those are my questions.
Anybody else?
I go ahead. Courtney.
I was just wondering, I know that we've gone through this whole exercise over the last couple of years. And I don't mean to discount that in any regard, but I have to ask if there's any way to make it easier for the business owners at this point. I mean, given the fact that it's so expensive and we have this prototype, which I agree with the railing and the hog wire, but since we're utilizing wood on the railing, and the setup that is down there for the most part is wood, is there, I mean, I know we're specifying ceramic, but is there any way to incorporate the wood at this point, or just saying that since they look nice, we could utilize their existing planters if they meet certain criteria, just to make it easy over, expense-wise, methods-wise, construction-wise, everything. It just seems like, especially after listening to Reef Dog earlier, is there any outlook for that?
That's exactly why we're here. And so this is staff's recommendation, but by all means, the planning commission makes the decision here. So it's up to the planning commission. And if you,
I mean, I understand the utilization of the deck because the drainage and all that stuff, but making it all the necessary improvements to what's there, I'm just concerned just for the welfare of the businesses. This basis.
no, tonight you have the ability.
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Any specific questions of staff?
Yeah, I do. Going back in the previous commission, what was approved, there's, if I remember correctly, there's like selected furniture, like options and colors and stuff like that. And so if that's still staying in place, but the planners now will not, they can be of any color. So I was just wondering, the thought process, just trying to respect the previous work that has been done by everybody. And now interjecting that now that the planter can not, they don't have to match, they all have to match, but they don't have to match anything specific. Is that correct?
What we're proposing is that the businesses have flexibility to purchase the pots that they'd like. We're suggesting certain materials. I do want to clarify on so tonight we were only looking at changes to the railing and the pots. The furniture itself that's in the prototype design, there's so many options to pick from. We stated that it has to be outdoor furniture and it has to be made by one of the three manufacturers that are reputable manufacturers that the stuff is going to last. So that's the only parameters there is they can order. They also have to be compliant with ADA. So they'll have to have one, you can't have pedestal tables at all seats. You have to have one area that, for ADA access. But
Sorry, I probably misunderstood. I thought before when it was selected, there was obviously manufactured, but I thought there was a color palette that was connected with that too. So any restaurant
color.
had wide open color palette as long as it's in there. Okay, great, thank you. My next question is regarding, in the report, it talks about deck also. Was that supposed to be talked about tonight? Or the decking materials?
Oh, so the decking materials, there's two options within the prototype. There's Trex and there's Redwood. So we were keeping both options, but we were asking that we be allowed to add one more color to Trex that would complement the Redwood better.
Perfect. And then my other question regarding that, my understanding that the permit said that businesses will be for 3 years. Is that correct?
Yes, the permit will be good for 3 years.
And so there's opportunity, there is a potential at the end of 3 years, any investment they make, city council makes a decision, no outdoor dining or something like that, or any commissioner, exactly, but if there's a recommendation, this investment that they made would be, they have to be removed because it's only standing for 3 years. Is that correct?
So after 3 years, it'll be reviewed for like, what was this a success? Did we have any issues with coastal access? That was really the reason for the 3-year requirement was put on there by the Coastal Commission. So that if there were any issues with coastal access at that point, we could say, this is not working. It's become an impediment to getting to the beach. And then they could be removed. So after 3 years, the program will be reviewed. And then it can be continued at that point if there are findings that it has not been an issue to coastal access.
Okay, that's all the questions I had at this time. Thank you.
So reviewed by us or reviewed by the coastal commission?
By us,
Local control.
local control. It could get appealed where it's I think it's an extension of the permit. So it could get they could call it up. They could appeal it to coastal commission.
Just to be clear on the composite decking material, you're not specifying the Trek name. Can you use TimberTech? Pretty good alternative.
I think they could. They have to match the colors though. There were
They're almost the same.
yeah, and you can give me direction on that as well. The colors that we picked for that were really to complement the planters and the railing, which are now totally changed. So
I'm mostly worried about the colors, not necessarily.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we open it up to the public?
I'm sorry, I do have one more question. So just going back to I think Ale House, they're in the is there a timeline for their outdoor dining to stay in place with the permit? I mean, do you give them 6 months to get a permit? If they don't go through the process, is there a time, a lapse time that it expires?
Yes. So as long as their building permit continues to move forward, there's no real lapse. It was really an administrative policy that was put in place. At this point, though, I think it would be appropriate for the Planning Commission if you wanted to give direction on that. Now that we're looking at other options to bring down the cost, we do have that application in, but if there's any direction on if you want me to put the duration was always as long as they had their building permit in.
I was just trying to understand, sorry for the question, trying to understand the process. They had to have the outdoor dining decks removed by January 1, I think, correct? And so some were removed from the storm. Some were removed because restaurants removed them because they need to. And then there were some that were left in place. And then they started the permit process after that period, or was that permit process started before they were supposed to be removed?
That started after. So I think at that point we reached out to them and said, it's time to remove the deck or you have to bring in your permit. Yeah. And for that one, the permit that they've submitted to the building department includes the existing deck that's out there. So it wasn't, they put in the I think either Trex or the redwood and the actual deck, but they were proposing their planters again, which was denied by planning commission. So they now have comments back from the building department and planning saying you can't utilize, that was denied by planning commission. You have to update it with the prototype. So I think tonight they're looking like they're another one of the businesses that would like a less expensive alternative.
I was just trying to understand this, the standard that's being
Yeah.
set across all businesses. Some have them, some don't, some got taken out, and what the time frame is and what the process is. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we will open this item up to the public. If there's anyone here who would like to speak, you're welcome to come to the podium. We appreciate you signing in if you don't mind, so we get your name correct in the minutes, but you're not required to.
Hi, my name is Peter Blackwell. I'm with English Ales, and I'm the one who has the wooden planters on Capitol Avenue. So never let a chance go by to give a second opinion. With regard to damage, I built my own house. I built my daughter's house. I've built 9 pubs. I currently have redwood and Trex and all manner of materials, either on decks or in building. I have a bit of difficulty in understanding why you have some problems with wood. When you look down Capitola, just about the whole bloody fascia is wood. And we don't seem to have a problem with that. Concrete and ceramic will chip. Repairing that is difficult and almost invariably will show. Wood, however, if it's damaged, you can fill, repaint, and it looks as good as new. With regard to the weight, if that's a consideration, and then the planters that I currently have there, I can fill with stone up to 3/4 full, fill it with dirt at the top, and they'll be heavier than any of the other planters that are being considered tonight. At the last meeting I mentioned, somebody mentioned that the planters were pink. And I mentioned that that was the problem with sending a colorblind person to buy paint. And that was me. So we can match the paint because I have paint left over from when we painted the building. What I didn't get tonight, I saw different types of planters, and some of the prices were $300, $600, but that's for a 14 by 36 planter or something like that. The original planters, I mean, I've got 42 feet of frontage. I've had planters on everywhere. They would be a damn sight more expensive than the other one, cumulatively, than the other one. So I'd like some guidance if I have to put other planters there. How many? How much railing in between? But again, getting back to what I originally got here to say is, I quite like what I have. Maybe the color needs to be adjusted, and I'd be more than happy to do that. And I think it's equally as safe, and we can bolt those planters to the deck so that if they did get hit, they wouldn't fall over. 14 seconds left. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment on this item? Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Would someone like to start? Pardon me? Oh, anyone on Zoom? Thank you.
There are no participants on Zoom.
No, I appreciate you reminding me. For some reason, I have difficulty with that. So with that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion. Would someone-
I'll be happy to start because I want to support your notion. And so I was on the planning commission when this first came up. Some of you weren't. And the thought was that, well, this is a public property, so we get to weigh in on the design, and you want to have, you know, if it's a public facility, you want it like a park bench, you want to have some consistency, street light lamps, you want to have a different street lamp in front of every business. So the notion was, well, let's have some consistency. What I've found, however, is that we've gone down the rat hole of trying to be architects and designers, and I don't think we've been successful. You know, it's the classic camel being a horse designed by committee, right? And so I would like to back off my position of you know, trying to specify the design. I like what English Ales has done now that we've seen these parklets in work for a while. See how well the owners do it when they have the opportunity. The argument about the wood planters is well taken. So in my attitude is, if we meet safety requirements, and I would specify rectangular planters at least. That would probably be my own only design feature. We would keep the furniture requirements, would open up the deck material to any colors, and then just get an opportunity to approve the designs as they come before the planning commission, because I don't think we're successful with this prototype design so far. So that's my comment.
I was just gonna add to bring the microphones all the way up to because I was outside. I forgot to mention that I couldn't hear anybody. just a side note. That's what I was gonna add. But I concur with Commissioner Wilk that I just feel like if they could if we could evaluate each design as it comes in. I think when we first took this prototype and started evaluating the prototype, there was a lot more parklets being shown, and those ones have since kind of petered off, especially on the Esplanade. Those ones seem to be a bit more haphazard and a little scattered, and the plants were dead and stuff like that. So the parklets that have sustained, you know, they're really pretty, and they're nice, and the plants are still living. Everything looks, the businesses that have kept them going have really done a good job. And I feel like that should be considered moving forward.
So the original intent then of this prototype was to expedite the approval process?
I think, yeah, well, and the original intent was that these were going in the public right of way. And so there was concern that there be some consistency with how they looked in the public right of way, as well as how they functioned as far as, you know, safety and in the community.
So I'll also add to that, when we were tasked by city council to move forward with an ordinance, they asked us to build in a prototype design that would be approved administratively. It just needs a building permit. And the ordinance also includes a custom design, which any applicant can come to the planning commission and apply for a custom design. So in the English Ales did come forward with a custom design, and it was, I don't remember if it was redwood or the Trex, but it was a new Trex with the planters on top, and that was denied at the planning commission as a custom design. But for the purpose of this evening, because we have a prototype design in our code, we do need to, I don't think we can say the prototype design can be custom. I think I would have to modify the code. So if we want to continue to have that administrative approval process that goes through building, we will still have to, I'm sorry, but be a little bit of the designer in this, because there has to be an approved prototype design for people to but we are trying to make it more flexible. That is part of this conversation. So
So we could modify the prototype design based on what you're proposing tonight.
So our proposal tonight is to modify the prototype design to allow this new hog wire redwood fence, take out the big planters and just require planters within it that they can pick from. And we were suggesting heights. If you don't think those heights, you can be more flexible. We tried to come in with a package that was that we thought would work. So, but if you don't want to regulate the planters at all, like it's really up to the planning commission. So
Could we recommend, them utilizing their existing planters, being wood or not? Just
yeah, you could require that there's a minimum amount of planters and not be so specific about their design.
Sounds like we could just,
Or you can say they don't have to have planters. You can leave it up to them. So that's
it sounds like if we just expand the material to include
wood or paint.
to include wood or as far as I'm concerned, metal or anything that will hold dirt. I'm okay with, and it's rectangular, so that's the prototype. We have a rectangular planter. Not going to specify what it's made out of. The fencing between planters, I don't know. Can we be more flexible on that as well?
well, currently we're saying the planters aren't part of the fencing. It's just the new hog wire fence that will be around the surround. So the planters are just on the deck inside.
They're right inside the rail.
Yeah, so it's just a railing. There's no planter incorporated into the railing. It's just a railing. And then we were requiring that they utilize planters to have a certain amount of planters, 2 at the entryway, 1 like flagging the entryway, and then
So,
one in each
so
corner.
I'm comparing this to our prototype ADU, right? So we have this standard ADUs that are staff approved, the counter level, but it rarely, well, let's just say oftentimes ADUs come in with requests for custom ADUs. Probably the majority of the time that's the case. So the way I can envision this prototype then would be, okay, here's what this is the kind of thing we're looking for. They take that as a template and they say, okay, we're not going to vary too much from this. We'll still have rectangular planters. They'll be in each corner. We'll have railing. We'll have the same deck material, blah, blah, blah. But then they could come to us with variations off of that, knowing that they're, following most of the guidelines of the prototype.
The way I understand it is, right now, there are 2 processes you go through to get your outdoor dining deck. You can follow the prototype design, which the city has. And if you follow that, then you just come in for an over-the-counter permit with it. If you want to do something different than the prototype design, you can come in and you can apply for whatever kind of outdoor dining deck you want to have. Just as the Ale Place came in and applied for an outdoor dining deck, but that one particular design got turned down by planning. I do think that Katie is correct. We have in our ordinance prototype design, which allows them to get the administrative permit. And if we want to continue having this streamlined permit process, we need to have a prototype design. We just need to figure out what we're going to have in that design and what's going to be the criteria. But there does have to be a design and a criteria for it to work in the structure being part of the ordinance.
Got it. Yes.
So we haven't heard from this end of the.
So with that being said, I would expand the material for, I think the hog wire is great. I installed it myself. Powder coated stuff is really good. Animals could do their thing on it and it doesn't rust. So it's pretty durable. As the planters go, I would not restrict them. I would not allow them to use wood. I would allow wood to be added. I think it would look nice. It's relatively cheap, and since they have a 3-year risk of, I can only put this thing up for 3 years, and somebody in Sacramento who never goes to the coast decides that we can't have this process anymore, then they're out, right? So they don't want to spend too much money on something you might throw away in 3 years. That's my one concern. As to the colors, if you go to Timber Tech or Tech, you got a wide range of colors, but I think the 4 you've got since it's a prototype, that's probably those are my thoughts.
Thank you. So I talked to a lot of the business down there. The biggest concerns I've heard from the whole prototype thing is cost, lead time. And I think, I'm glad to see, I brought up the last planning commission meeting, trying to get an update because we hear this all the time. But I think issues I've heard is the planters. And it seems like that is being addressed, and we're come up with different option for those. And I could probably get behind the wood planter as an option would be fine. The next thing I hear a lot about was the railing, and the railing has a lot of safety issues from, I think we all can say, oh, cable railing's nice and everything, but it does flex, and then it gets to be kind of a safety issue from like a kid's entrapment issue. So with the hog wire mesh like that kind of thing will get taken out of play from a safety standpoint. And so I think that addressed it. Also, I think it addresses the turnaround time with shop drawings, and it's very in detailed railing that was approved the first time. And so I think we go to those wire mesh, Tractor Supply, Home Depot, something pretty readily available. So I think that addresses a lot of the concerns with the Trex and the redwood. Those are two options that I think pretty much readily available. And I would agree with what Commissioner Esty said. Was I think there should be kind of a parameter of set colors that we can not deviate from, because some of those Trex colors can go way off the mark. And not that we are designers, architects, but if you've got 4 or 5 of those in a row, it could be completely different and maybe get out of control from the standpoint of if the goal was to have some kind of uniformity on it. So I think having a set parameter and streamlining the concerns that I've heard, and then that the prototype, they could come in, if they meet the prototype, they could be off and rolling, getting the railing taken care of. I'm getting their deck taken care of and start to utilize it. I have 2 questions. I would advocate for if a restaurant was building their deck out and they had ordered their materials and they showed proof of purchase, and the lead time, hopefully the lead time is something reasonable, that they could utilize their deck. Where, we have the whole village has been damaged from the storm and everything, and I'd like to see some flexibility in that if they did procure it, it's been purchased, it is coming. But if, let's say, it got delayed for 6 or 8 weeks, they can miss the whole entire summer, and it's a lot of cost in what they've already expended. And the other part to that is with the change in this prototype, and if a business has already turned in for a permit, is it the same exact permit fees, or are there any changes in the permit fee structure that the permit, the review time would be less now? I was wondering if a restaurant has already turned in a permit and has already paid for the permit, and their fees were, let's say, $10,000, and now it's streamlined, and a new restaurant came in today, Crusoe's came in and said they were going to turn in, and the review time's a lot less because there's not as much back and forth, and the permit cost would be, I'd want that to be reviewed to make sure that, because one of the restaurants were the first ones out, they didn't incur the most cost and spent the most amount of money on a permit, and now it's been streamlined, and then everybody else is going to get in the same. So just if you elaborate on that, I just want to be sensitive to that.
Sure. So if there's a modification to a permit, so the first review is usually up to 6 weeks. And then follow-up reviews are typically around 2 to 3 weeks. So they would be in the faster review category for a modification. So if they came back with the hog wire fence and the new design, that they'd be on the faster track. And we'd also, for that modification, we could work with them on, they're not paying for a new permit. This is a modification to a building permit.
And you'll handle them as they came in, like
Yep.
attention or turnaround time and stuff.
Yes. Yep. I mean, it would fall under our typical system of,
Absolutely.
oh, yeah.
Okay.
So I could have more
Oh, I-
clarification on that.
Pardon me?
I was trying to get more clarification.
Sure, go ahead.
So someone comes in with a prototype, they get it approved over the counter, and then Jerry's suggestion or comes up, which is, oh, lead times, and I can't get that exact same material. Let's say, for example, it's a different deck color. Would it be staff's ability to approve that, or what? I mean, is there a range of discretion that you have that says, well, that's close to the prototype that you'd approve it over the counter, or any deviation would have to come to the planning?
So what I was hearing from Jerry was more about the furniture lead time separate. So anything that's required in the prototype, we would not have flexibility on.
So
So
they would come to us then as
They-
this is
yeah,
obviously a
if-
custom design.
if they said we want to do this beautiful tile work, that would be a custom design that comes to you. Because Trex and Redwood should be readily available. So I'm thinking like now what we have these down to, it's basically are items that are readily available at Home Depot. So I don't see any issues with those. But if what I was hearing Commissioner Jensen say was if the lead time on this great furniture that is 6 weeks out, he would like to see flexibility with as long as they can show us a receipt that they've paid for it and it's being delivered, that he would like us to have flexibility for them to put different chairs out until the prototype chair
So, okay, so
arrives.
that's the same issue though. So your flexibility, what is your flexibility?
Well, that's a lead time thing with just the furniture.
Let's just.
So if you'd like us to have that flexibility, I'd like to get that feedback from Planning Commission tonight. Because originally we were saying we were not going to give occupancy for the prototypes unless every part of the prototype was out there. But if you'd like more flexibility, there's no.
We'll work on it. Thank you. So for me, my comments are, I don't have any difficulty adding wood. And I think that those can be done. I did have a question about, you've shown a redwood railing with the hog wire in it, and that's not painted. So I'm assuming that the redwood railing with hog wire is just going to be the natural redwood, not something that's going to be painted.
We will require a clear coat on it. Mhm.
And as far as the planner is concerned, I wanted to make certain that all of the planters that are, going to go in the corners that they all match. And that the planters all be, and I don't know how to phrase this because I know some ceramic wire, not a solid color, they have some variation in them, but planters without, big floral designs on them. And I do think this is going in the public right of way, and I'm not too concerned if they're all red or all orange or how they work out, but I think they should match and, be a solid color and be within the 30 to 36 inches in height to go forward. For the Trex, it sounds like we have a range of colors in there that are available right now, and I would be comfortable as long as staff felt that what was being put in was, compatible with that range of colors. If it's slightly grayer, slightly lighter, those kinds of things don't really matter to us. It's sort of the overall palette of colors that we're interested in. I think that, one of the things you do learn over time is, you have to be careful about temporary things. Because, temporary furniture goes in and then it never gets replaced. But I would be comfortable with Commissioner Jensen's suggestion if they could show that they have ordered the appropriate chairs to go in and they have tables, but the chairs haven't arrived, then it would be fine for me to put sort of temporary chairs in while they're waiting for that order to arrive. But I would like to know that they have been ordered and they're on their way and we're not going to have temporary furniture go on and on. It seems like we have a consensus and you all can correct me. One thing we didn't talk about was the rectangular shape of the planters. It makes a lot of sense to me, but it probably does eliminate a lot of the ceramic work. Do we want to sort of take a straw vote on the rectangular shape?
I think that's what's that's a consistent thing. So I would be okay with keeping the rectangular shape as a requirement.
I would be okay with that. I don't know.
I'm fine. That would just probably exclude any ceramic.
They did show us one example of a sort of, I think it was square, but they do have rectangular.
I could go, yeah, that's great.
I don't think we should preclude, I mean, we could say circular, rectangular. If they want to make something nice, like a nice arrangement of circular or different shapes. I'm kind of of the persuasion to say that they,
I would like to see sort of rectangular or square.
Yeah.
like-
Not to open a Pandora's box, but now that the planters are going to be on the deck, right? Are there any concerns that that's reducing the size of the seating on the deck now? And so that, because it wasn't before, it wasn't going to be on the deck. Is that true?
Definitely. So before the planters were around the periphery. So if the planters that are on the deck will take up seating area. So if we're going for a more rectangular look, maybe considering something like towards the left here where it's a square and won't take up as much of floor space.
I'd be fine either way. I just want to be sensitive to, they would understand that wherever they're picked, they're kind of giving up seating space, right?
But it definitely will limit. I think concrete will be like one of like there won't be as much pottery available if you don't allow a circular. So just to be clear, that's from the experience that Sean had.
So now I'm confused. My understanding is the reason we were having the planters in the corners was really a safety issue. We wanted something big and heavy with a lot of dirt in it so that when the cars, come bumping down there, that the restaurant patrons won't be disturbed or harmed, right? So now if we're talking about putting planters that are maybe have a small bottom and a round shape and just resting on the deck, it seems like that defeats the whole purpose.
kind of feel like sorry, I don't mean to.
Go ahead.
I feel like it seems pretty speculative to say that, the wooden box filled with rocks or a concrete planter are going to prohibit a car. I mean, we don't really have any data to support any of that. So it's kind of, saying, well, one's going to be safer than the other. But I mean, we have a wooden rail with hog wire. So it's, I think, just coming to the conclusion of what do you want to see it seems to be the more overreaching issue. And for that much, I mean, we could say that it's making requirements of, have a deck, like modifying the prototype to just say we need a deck with adequate drainage. We need a railing, a perimeter railing, and then we need some planters of some type to dress it up. And with some nice furniture, which I would say that the furniture that we specified before, if everybody's in agreement that that's fine. But making it kind of an ease of entry into this whole transition would seem a bit more appropriate for economic climate.
So you mentioned something about safety bollards that, so that's what's kind of my concern, right?
Thank you. Yeah, so our city, our public works director has looked at this, and in her opinion, the heavy planters could be helpful if a car were to bump, but really a true safety mechanism is a bollard. So on the streets in which cars move faster through the city, a bollard would be more appropriate. Along the Esplanade where cars really drive slow, it's not as much of a worry, and she'll look at each deck individually to decide whether or not it should require a bollard. Commissioner Christensen is right on track with the staff thought process with this, is that we've moved away from the planters being a safety component of the deck and more of an aesthetic. So just to dress it up and give it some life. So that is where this has gone, because these are not going to protect anyone from a car. These
But we're not
planters.
prescriptive in just saying how many planters or what total area or whatever we're going to require.
So within the prototype, what I'm suggesting this evening is that we require a planter on each side of the entryway onto the decks and at the four corners of the deck, and then along the street frontage where the cars drive by, wherever there's a post, there should be a planter. And that will vary on the size of, some of our restaurants will have up to 5 parking spaces. So they'll have multiple posts and have to put planters along each of those. So yeah, it was really an aesthetic to keep the greenery there and the,
Now we're taking away revenue because those planters are now taking up square footage that could be people sitting at, right?
Mhm.
Changed your whole concept, right?
Yep.
I get that wrong?
Yeah,
Isn't it
it looks like it's a different concept than I thought I approved long ago.
So how about we say that the planters can be square or round or rectangle? The applicant, but they have to be a minimum of diameter of 14 or 15 inches, somewhere in that range. So and that's not very big. I mean, you're talking about this. And certainly, since the fence is going to be on the outside now, and these planters are going to be on the inside, the planters that we were going to have were encroaching into the inside in that space. So I don't think these dining decks are going to end up with significantly less dining space on them with the planters, because they were going to have those planters encroaching into the dining deck space before. I mean, the dining deck was going, because I think the planters that we had before, we had dimensions on those, and I think they were like 14 inches this way. So you still had to fit those in the space. So why don't we just say that planters have to be a minimum of that size? If somebody wants to do more, they can do more.
So that's a great point. So that in some areas between the planters, there'll be gaining deck space.
Yes. Yeah.
I think overall, leaving it up to the business owner at this stage, I'm in favor for. I think.
I'll make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation for the prototype, but with the condition that there's flexibility. I don't know if it would be like a TOC for the restaurant to use the deck if they have established that the materials have been ordered, and so that they could use that as soon as they possibly could. And I think with the outline of the flexibility and changing to wood planters at the same time, I'd like to make that the motion.
The planters all match.
Yes.
Should they all be the same color?
I'll go match.
Okay with that. I'll second that motion.
Okay.
What about restriction on size. Proposal we just talked about. That 14-inch minimum.
So what does it currently say?
That it has to have a minimum height between, a minimum of 30 inches up to 36 inches.
Doesn't have a volume or dimensional requirement.
What would
Yeah.
you say about, for example, English ales using their existing planters modified in the existing prototype? Like their wood planters,
Well, I think they would have to come in and apply for custom design.
right? There-
Don't want to change all of it to.
I know.
I'll amend the motion say that it'd be 14 inches.
You have a motion and a
Oh, I
second.
thought I thought I was asking to amend it, to add to it.
Do you want to
Oh, sorry.
Add a friendly amendment
add?
Yeah.
to include the 14 inches.
Sure.
Okay, so he's adding friendly amendment. Second agrees with that. Okay, so we have a motion and a second.
More discussion, maybe there's comments.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there are we going with staff's recommendation on the minimum amount of pots? So 2 at the entryway, 1 at each corner, and then the posts along the main road?
Yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Estee,
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilt,
Aye.
Vice Chair Christensen,
I-
and Chair Westman.
Aye. Okay, so the motion passes unanimously.
Can I ask one more question? 'Cause I think this question probably exists in the audience too. So for the English ales, if they came in with a permit for the prototype design with the redwood fence and the hog wire, can they put their planters if they meet the height requirement and the width requirement on the interior of this new?
I
It sounds to me, I think they could. They'll have to design it so they have 2 by the entrance and 1 in each corner and 1 along. So it may or may not work for them, but they'll have to figure that piece out. Okay. Thank you. I think I have clarity.
All right, now we're going to. Yeah, I think staff can answer your question because we've sort of completed the item. We can't go back at this point.
I'm sorry, is there a time limit to, we talked about that briefly on, like English ales, they have a time frame to amend their, or I'm just trying to understand the process from here out for everybody.
Yes, so the permits that are in, they can be amended. So the applicants can come into City Hall. Unfortunately, I am not in the office tomorrow, but on Monday they could come in and meet with me and talk through this, or meet with Sean tomorrow. But the timing is they need to keep their building permits on track. However, I do realize that we're into June right now, and we'll be open to the conversation of like putting their decks on hold if they decide that they don't want to move forward this summer because it's so late. And that could be another part of the conversation. So, but in terms of if they're not moving forward with their building permit in a timely manner, then yes, the prototype, the emergency decks are supposed to be out of the right of way if you're not working on your permit.
Would that just fall into the guidelines right now? Like when you get a permit, you have 180 days, right?
Yeah, we
Or
didn't.
You could ask for an extension. I mean, just, right?
Right, yeah.
Can I ask one more question? With English ales coming in with their custom building permit, I think it was a few months ago, December. Since the prototype has changed, I mean, is there any like I feel the consideration during that meeting was looking at how they related to the existing prototype. And since it's changed so much, is there any recourse on them representing their proposal as a custom design? Kind of abstract. I'm sorry. I'm just asking.
So under the code, when you've had a permit denied,
Mhm.
you would have to make a substantial change to your application to bring it back in front of the planning commission.
Mhm.
So if there's desire on behalf of the planning commission, could do that, but that is the code language is that if something has been denied, I think there's also a time limitation to that in which the time, a specific amount of time after 1 year, you can resubmit for reconsideration.
Could we make any type of exception if there's any interest in considering? No,
That's the code,
okay. I just asking all the questions.
but they,
So.
will be available.
We're really not supposed to because, okay.
We'd be happy to meet tomorrow.
Staff will meet with you and go over it and come up with what your options are. Because we just did a motion and a second, so we're not going to change what we've said. Yeah. You could send that to us or, communicate it through the staff. Thank you. All right, let's move on to item C, which is the citywide housing element update. And are we going to have a staff presentation? Is our consultant going to be with us on Zoom? How is this going to work?
Yes, so we do have our consultant with us tonight and can you see Veronica and Brett on the camera?
Yes. Should I unmute?
You can unmute them and then I'm just not seeing that. Usually there's a little, something pops up here where you can see. Oh. Let's see. There we go. Brett and Veronica, I'm just gonna test that we can hear you okay?
Yes, I'm here.
Sure, can you hear me, Katie?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, I'll start and then hand it off to Veronica shortly. So this evening, we're going to go over the latest on our housing element update. Tonight we'll be discussing, sorry, I'm gonna try to move this. Okay, tonight we'll be discussing what is the housing element, what public outreach has been done to date. We'll go over the public review draft, programs and policies, and then also next steps. I'd like to introduce our team. We have Brett Stinson of RRM Design Group and Veronica Tam of Veronica Tam and Associates. So what is a housing element? A housing element is one of 7 required elements of the general plan. It's an assessment of a city's housing needs and how to best accommodate existing and future housing needs for our population and our regional population. There's a deadline of December 15th in which we need to submit this to the state. It does not have to be approved by December 15th, but submitted to the state by December 15th. And then it will be reviewed for compliance by the HCD at the state Housing and Community Development. So on this slide, we show the process for a housing element update. We're in step 2. We're still in the public outreach process. We've gone through our housing needs assessment. Brett and Veronica's team has put together our first draft of the housing element, which has been out we've started our public review period. And the next steps are HCD review of the draft, adoption locally, and then submittal to the state. For public outreach, we've made quite a few efforts. We had an online housing needs survey. Sorry, and that did conclude this. I didn't update that part of the slide, but that finished in March. Stakeholder interviews were back in November. We've had 2 community workshops, one in February, one on May 16th. The Planning Commission has met, I think, 3 times on this item. First in February, then for a joint Planning Commission City Council meeting, and more recently just to announce that the public review draft was available. And also City Council had a study session in February. We're continuing our public outreach opportunities. So with this hearing tonight, and then we'll have the draft is available right now for comments, and then we'll also have available opportunities during our adoption hearings in the fall after we get HCD comments. The key takeaways from our community workshop a couple weeks back were to attach affordability requirements to future upzoning, density bonus, and value capture. There was some skepticism regarding the state park sites, which continues to come up. We'll see if it makes it into the final draft. There was concern over the high percentage of low income and affordable units that were attached to the mall, and concern specifically that this would impact the no net loss issues that are required by law. There was also comments made about would like to see more commitment to programs in the housing element update. We use a lot of softer language, and in this, the person who commented on this said we'd like to see more action-oriented language, such as the city will, and then attach specific dates to what we're saying we will do. We also heard we need to protect our existing affordable housing stock in the city. So really putting money or putting effort and focus on existing programs. Also concerns over constraints to build ADUs and a desire to streamline and have more protections in place for ADUs. Another theme that continues to come up at all of these, at the hearings and the public outreach, has been the balance of sites citywide. Often Capitola is looked at having like the breaking point being the creek, and having a better, well-distributed, more balanced distribution between both sides. And then also questions came up regarding rent control, and I'll be speaking about that during the director's report. So, so the public review draft is available. It became available in May. It's going to be available through next Friday for public comment. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Veronica.
Thank you, Katie. Now I'm going to go through the housing element, just a little bit more description about the contents of the housing element. The housing element is highly regulated by the state law in terms of its contents. We need to hit a lot of discussions relating to the housing element. Needs assessment, constraints and resources, opportunities, and also looked at how we have done in the past. And then the last, so probably the most important component is what are we going to do in the future? Now, next slide. In the needs assessment, we do need to look at the demographic and household characteristics in your community, so that we can have a better understanding of what the needs are currently and possibly into the future. We need to look at your current housing stock and also your market conditions, whether those your current housing stock is matching the needs in your community, and also special housing needs. And in terms of special housing needs, typically under state law, those are the elderly, disabled, households with large households with 5 or more members, the homeless, female-headed households, and also farm workers. These are the specific households or persons that the state decided, state law really mandates this housing element to look at, because these groups typically have more difficulty finding decent and affordable housing. Next slide. In terms of constraints, and we have the needs, and we also need to look at what are the framework of what we can be working with in order to address the needs. We have to look at really governmental constraints, and governmental constraints means that it's development regulations and land use policies, what you do to facilitate housing development in your community. We also looked at market and economic constraints and environmental constraints. Now, as a local jurisdiction, you have very little control or influence over the market, and certainly have very little control over the environment either. But you do have control over the development regulations and policies that you enact as a local jurisdiction. Under housing element law, you are legally obligated to mitigate development regulations and land use policies that are found by the state to be constraining to housing development. Next slide. Then we look at resources. What are the resources that we have available to address the housing needs? The number one kind of resource that we have to look at is whether you have available sites for future development. And that's where it's related to development standards and also land use policies. We have to, in the housing element, we have to identify sites that are appropriately zoned with appropriate development standards that can facilitate and encourage a variety of housing types for all income groups in your community. We also look at what are the financial capacity resources that you have to facilitate the development of affordable housing, and also important public-private partnerships, because as a local jurisdiction, again, you cannot function as a developer, but you can work with developers, private and nonprofit or market rate developers in order to provide housing in your community, and also work with some nonprofit organizations that may be providing some supportive services. Next slide. In order to kind of come up with your next 8 years of housing actions, we obviously look at the needs that you have. We look at the constraints that you're facing. We look at the resources you have available, but we also want to look at what worked and what doesn't work in your community. What was the housing element actions that were included in your previous housing element, the 5th cycle housing element, and whether those programs are working or not. In looking at the city, what the city was able to achieve over the last 8 years or so, even as a small city, you were able to achieve quite a bit. You updated your commercial zoning to include mixed use practically in most of your commercial categories. You have also adopted objective design standards in order to streamline review and approval of projects. You have commissioned prototypes for ADU buildings so that it would allow homeowners to utilize those pre-approved kind of plans. It doesn't mean that the project is pre-approved, but the plans will give them a head start in terms of designing their ADUs in the community. You have also created like ADU guidance for the public, and also updated your inclusionary policy. You've helped mobile home rehab programs to actually provide for rehabilitation of some mobile homes, and then provide down payment assistance. Now, those are more limited compared to what you had anticipated, mainly because of the lack of funding. We are including programs in the housing element to really pursue additional funding in the future. You have also created a 36-unit, 100% affordable housing project. Next slide. So in this upcoming 8 years of housing element, the housing action plan has 7 housing goals. The first 6 of them is similar to what you have right now, because you've been successful in implementing some of your programs, and the goal seems to be really aligning with the community vision. But what we did have to add is the affirmatively furthering fair housing goal, which is a new requirement of state law, which the affirmatively furthering fair housing really actually requires local jurisdictions to look at the housing policies and regulations in a very different in an equity kind of lens. And so this additional goal is new to the housing element. Next slide. In terms of the facilitating housing production, Katie will go into that a little bit further, but we have identified sites that are based on the current the city's existing zoning and general plan. We do not anticipate any need to rezone or upzone properties at this time, but there is a new requirement when it comes to providing adequate sites and facilitating development. There's a requirement to replace housing that's demolished if the housing is occupied or deed restricted for lower income households. We have you have a fairly robust ADU environment, and also the city has been doing quite a bit to foster that. And so we have programs to make sure that the city will continue to promote and facilitate ADUs and mixed-use development. One thing that we also looked at is other alternative types of housing in your community. What can the city do in the future to look at alternative types of housing that may be appropriate to your community, maybe such as co-housing, micro units, and some other type of housing that you may be interested in the future. In terms of facilitating affordable housing development, we have continue the program of mobile home park assistance and preservation of the rental housing. Those are important in your community because Capitola in general, your housing prices are high. So preserving what you currently have as affordable housing is very important. It's expensive to build affordable housing. We also want to encourage the use of housing choice vouchers and also incentivize the development of affordable housing in your community through a variety of incentives such as density bonus. We want to continue the community outreach throughout the whole process of the housing element implementation. So public outreach doesn't stop with the adoption of the housing element. As the city continues to implement the actions, there are additional commitments in this housing element that the city will continue to conduct outreach and education. We also have the inclusionary housing ordinance and housing trust funds, continuing that program because that is one of the probably the key resource that the city has. Without redevelopment, this is the one key resource that you have in generating some income in revenue in order to facilitate affordable housing in the future. Next slide. As I mentioned before, that you have this, there are special groups that have more difficulty accessing affordable and decent housing. So we have a group of programs that address special housing needs. In some of them are relating to complying with state law, particularly with zoning regulations, such as emergency shelters, transitional and supportive housing, employee housing, and housing for persons with disability. Employee housing in here deals with employees, housing that's for 6 or fewer employees and farm laborers if there, you know, if there is that such need. Definitely also addressing the housing needs for extremely low income households. This is also a special needs groups because people at the extremely low income who are earning about 30% of the area median income, they have more difficulty in accessing affordable housing. And in order to facilitate housing for families, large households, and also housing for female-headed households, with the expectation that a lot of their new housing is going to be located in commercial areas. So the city have some policies relating to encouraging development of childcare and daycare facilities in more of the commercial corridors. housing assistance. There are, as we talked about, there are some households that have more difficulty accessing affordable housing. So providing rental housing and home buyer assistance is important. The city does have access to some programs available through the county and through the state to provide assistance to these households. And you will see that also there is a fairly detailed fair housing programs this time compared to your current housing element. There are specific actions that the city will take from a fair housing perspective to provide education and outreach to facilitate mobility, meaning allowing people to move to different parts of the city and have choices in terms of locations and types. To increase housing opportunities throughout the city, to have targeted improvements in specific neighborhoods, and also to provide tenant protection and anti-displacement policy. So those are the key programs that we have included, and some are new, some are continued from your current housing element. Next slide. So one thing we talked about earlier, and you've probably seen this slide many, many times already. One thing we talked about is that you have to provide adequate sites to facilitate and encourage a variety of housing types in your community. The way to measure that requirement under state law is your ability to accommodate the regional housing needs assessment. And in this particular round, the 6th cycle housing element, our regional housing needs allocation is almost 10 times than what you had back in the 5th cycle. And that is certainly a challenge in identifying sites, but the city staff and Brett has been very active in work diligently identifying sites that are under current zoning and general plan, and we do not anticipate any rezoning necessary. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and she's going to go over the sites inventory again. But I do want to emphasize that the RHNA regional housing needs allocation is a planning goal, meaning that we have to identify sites. It's not a production obligation because the city cannot function as a developer. You don't have the ability to control the market and all of that. But the state does use density as a proxy to whether a site is feasible to facilitate lower income or moderate income as well. And primarily focusing on lower income, there is a default density that we have to meet in order to have a site considered to be feasible for lower income. With that, I will turn it back to Katie.
Thank you. So we have a couple slides of the site's inventory in case there's any questions or comments that come up this evening to discuss. But again, we've heard comments of we need to distribute this more evenly throughout Capitola. So in the last update after our joint meeting with Planning Commission and City Council, I think we met that goal. We furthered that goal. And this is just an aerial map showing the sites as well. This slide breaks down the different zones and how many of the different income levels are associated with each zone. And I think one thing that is apparent here is that there's a focused within our mixed use neighborhoods and our regional commercial and community commercial centers to really bring housing closer to our main transportation centers as well, and our shopping areas to really decrease vehicle miles traveled, which is a shared goal for the environment. And then when it comes to our single family residential, I think the numbers we're going to surpass what we have in here with ADUs alone, but the state really looks at what our ADU trends are and they won't let us project it higher. It has to be projected on the average trend, but as recently we came to you and informed you that since November of last year, we've had 14 ADU applications. So, and I heard this week we received another. So we're trending up. And so I do think our single family homes, which are mostly on this side of town, will be developing more of the housing stock than estimated in these graphs. So next steps, the public review draft is out. It'll conclude on June 10th. Then we have a 15-day city response period. And it's not like your formal EIR where you respond to every comment, but we take the comments and work and try to better the documents. Working on the document, we won't be directly reaching out to everyone that commented, but those comments will make it into the packet that goes to HCD to see that we've addressed comments. Planning Commission and City Council, that's our meeting tonight and next week, next Thursday at 6 p.m. Actually, at 6 p.m. for that meeting. And then we'll be submitting it to the HCD, public hearings in the fall. I did send out a request by email for a special meeting in October, just looking ahead. It's the third Thursday in October. I hope you all have that saved in your calendars. And then our statutory deadline is by December 15th. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I really appreciate it's a very long document when you take into consideration the appendices. And so I really appreciate my team working with Brett and Veronica has been amazing. They've been on task and got it to us on time. So a lot of appreciation there, but thank you, Planning Commission, for taking the time to review the document. If you have simple edits, you're welcome to bring them up tonight. But if you have a list of like spelling mistakes or simple edits, that we could hold off on those tonight and those could be emailed to me at a later time. Tonight, we're really looking for comments from the public and the commission regarding this document and so that we can respond to it during the response time. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing comments.
Sure, thank you. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I have some notes here. First of all, I wanted to thank Katie and the consultants for all the work. The report, as more and more I read, I just appreciated all the detail and all. I mean, it was amazing to look at our city in a whole different perspective from a document. So that was great. So thank you for all that. So a couple questions I had. First one was, it talks about Capitol as fairly high population density and everything. And it says compared to others in the cities in the state. Do you have any, like, is there, like, when it says it's fairly high population density, what, how does that really measure out across the state?
We could add that. We could get more specific in that description. As in the document, we're very clear that we are the most dense of the cities within the Santa Cruz County. So we'd be happy to add that to the document and find some comparable cities, coastal cities.
All right. The next one in paragraph 3 on page 144. It talks, the report, could the report also reflect the goal for the city to have workforce housing? We talked about affordable housing, but I think we've heard a lot about workforce housing, and I think it'd be nice to highlight that as something as a goal for the city. On that paragraph 3 on page 144, I didn't see that noted. I was wondering if that's something that you guys look at to see if that's the right place for that to be noted.
Sure.
The The next one was on page 312. Well, on page 26, but then also there's some notes about it on page 312. It talks about the transportation, the metro and stuff. Should we include a part in there about the grant that was just passed recently? In those notes, it talks about that there's 4 electric buses. I think that's the number they threw out. But they're going over to hydrogen and stuff, because the report talks about how bad the environment is, and air quality and stuff. And I think it might be nice to maybe update. I know that was just passed recently, but maybe that can be reflected in the report. And so somebody reads this, at another level at a different time, they can understand that it's not just our city, but also the county's taking steps towards that.
Yes, I'll bring our consultant up to date with the recent.
All right. One thing on page 100, it talks about the typical permit process time for the city of Capitola, to encourage development. Just speaking from a personal level, being a contractor and doing development, we should be, I think our city should be applauded by the turnaround time permits are here. I work in many other jurisdictions, especially over the hill. 10 months, 12 months, 14 months, San Jose. So I think it should be applauded by how quick the staff and your outside consultants do turnaround permits. And so I appreciate that just from being a contractor. I appreciate that turnaround time, but also I think our community should appreciate how efficient that you and your department run that. The next thing on page 104, it talks about traffic constraints. Should we also note in the report about the new improvements that are happening on Highway 1? Right now, it talks about the improvements we made in 2017 and stuff. And I thought, with the new, I don't know what the exact dollar amount was, but the shoulder busing, and I don't know what the exact terminology is, but it'd probably be nice to have that reflected.
That's on shoulder. Yep.
Yep, bus and shoulder. Yeah, thank you. Also on page 104, it talks about water supply and infrastructure. I was wondering if we should talk about, have it reflect what SoCal Water District's doing with the recharge station that they're putting in. Again, I don't know the exact word, so clean water, or what's the?
Yeah, Pure Water SoCal.
Thank you. That's an amazing project that they're putting in place, and in talking to their staff, I mean, they think that's going to solve a lot of our water issues coming up in the future. Sorry, I just have a couple more. I know the city council just at last city council meeting took some action on rent control. And I think that'd be great to have that noted somewhere in the report, that the rent control for the, not just the Cabrillo mobile home, but I think it was also addressing other mobile homes, if I remember correctly. Just one small quick thing, sorry, just on page on question 20 on page 212, it just doesn't have a date. It has just XX. So if we can just pick up that whatever date they were talking about on that meeting. And then on page 325, very cool. Oh, thank you. 325, it talks about the parks in figure 48, and I didn't see noted that the Jade Street Park was highlighted. And maybe I just missed that, but if we can just reflect that. And then just in summary of questions, in our numbers, it talks about, on the western part of Capitola, there's about 1,350 units. And on the eastern side of Capitola, there's talking about 227. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, or if it could be maybe looked at, but if, with on the west side, the number being at the 1,350, how many of those units are exactly at the mall? And so when we look at what the number really is, I've heard the comment from a lot of people in the community about making sure that this has been distributed equally across the city. If I know the mall's still on that side, but if we took that part of it out because there's an opportunity there, what are the numbers per se between the one side to the other side if the mall part was taken out? So I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, or maybe that can, I don't know if it should be highlighted, but I just hear that a lot. And then I try to explain to them that a lot of those numbers are at the mall. So those are all the comments that I had out of the report, but it was very detailed, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. I think it's 850 at the mall.
Thank you.
850.
So then that number drops down to 500 compared to the 227.
Correct.
So about twice.
And just to note, in the last cycle, we had 600 Park Ave. We also had the development on Hill Street, so there were more units on this side of Capitola the last two cycles. But it's it'd be an administrative approval if we were to keep those sites in right now, because they've been in the housing element for 2 cycles. And if they were included in the next housing element. So just when you're having those conversations, you can also explain to folks that in the past, it was actually that we had more on this side, but if we reutilize those sites, one, we haven't seen any interest by those developers to redo those sites. And 2, if we did use those sites, it's more risk to the city, I guess, in terms of review process, but.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, so I'd like to echo the comments about the report. I think it's very thorough. It's, extremely well done. I think you've updated a lot of things based on some of the feedback we've gotten. In my review of HCD's comments, and maybe Veronica can answer this question, throughout the state, because we're in the second wave of cities going through this whole rigmarole. The majority of the rejections seem to be on the basis of properties that are just the cities are proposing, but they're just not they're not likely to be developed in the cities, in the state's viewpoint, right? There are several, Culver City, I think, got nailed on that. Several in the Bay Area also were rejected. And I go back again to my insistence that the mall is our #1 thing. And I was looking for a more positive statement here about commitments to mall development, but maybe I missed it. I don't know if we have anything we can say that we are doing, along the lines of by this date, we will do this. To try to convince the HCD folks in Sacramento that we are serious about the mall development installed for quite a while.
Yes, yeah.
And not want to get rejected this time around because we didn't, pay attention to that element of this thing. So I don't know that, Veronica, if you have any comments about that and what you've seen in other jurisdictions.
I can quickly, just because Veronica is not aware of this, our city council has directed us in the coming year, there's money in the budget to really, we'll be studying the most effective way to get the mall to redevelop. So we've got $25,000 to put into a study to see what is our best alternatives in order to help redevelop the mall. So that's something that Veronica can add to this document to state that we are engaged. We want to see redevelopment, and we're starting to study it. So, but Veronica, with that, do you have additional comments?
Yeah, I think, the council, the plan commissioner is definitely true. Getting the substantial evidence that existing uses would not impede with development, I think that's important. But I think the city staff has been in communication with the mall, and I think adding the study would be a good demonstration. I think as we move closer to the review and submitting the housing element, we can also look at what additional kind of more concrete action that the city can take to facilitate that. But that's a very good point. It is the most difficult task this round with the housing element, and that's the reason why so many jurisdictions are still stuck. But I think that's a very good start that the city have with the feasibility study, or however you want to call that.
Yeah, because to be blunt, this thing's going to get reviewed by some bureaucrat in Sacramento that doesn't know anything about Capitola. So the more concrete things we can put in here to show that we are doing the best we can to develop this mall or redevelop this mall, I think that would help get this thing through the state. That's I think we've done a good job of trying to spread it out over the city and address that comment that we've got all over the place. But, you know, you're sort of limited by geography. And I think you've done a good job in getting that done. That's it from my side.
Oh, I would just like to ask one quick mall question since we're on that topic before we go down to this end of the table. So, at one point in time, the city had $1 million left over from when the city had a redevelopment agency that is dedicated to the mall. And I believe the city still has that money available. And I was wondering if it would be appropriate because we all know that, you know, affordable housing is going to have to be a part of any mall development. If it would make some sense to dedicate, if not all of that money, a portion of that money to, you know, help subsidize affordable housing on the mall.
When I was on the Finance Advisory Committee last year, I asked Jim Malberg that. He says, you lose them. We have lost them. We can't get the 960. I might be wrong, but I recall.
I'll double
Yeah,
check
we'll
on
find-
that.
We'll find out about that, but if we have it, it seems like
Spend it.
it might help us in this situation.
Yeah.
Sorry, to interrupt. We'll go down to this end of the table, Peter.
Yes. Okay. So I wasn't sure how to review this document, and glad you mentioned that we were not going over the spelling errors and things because I had a lot of questions about those. But fortunately, I was able to talk to Brian and get a lot of those things addressed. But I did have one major comment, and that is the executive summary. So my understanding is that, again, this is going to be reviewed by some bureaucrat at the HCD, sure, very competent, but doesn't know about Capitola. And so I've written a lot of documents and submitted them to customers throughout my career, and the executive summary is a very important, and it talks to Paul's point, which is we need to point out the good things we're doing in terms of cooperating and making big strides towards meeting our requirements. And the place to highlight those and get them fresh on everybody's mind is in the executive summary. So when they see them again, deep in the document at page 486, they say, oh yeah, for example, the mall, that should be highlighted in the executive summary, all the things we're going to do about that. The fact that we've already approved a high density. So we're already proactively so you could probably go through the list of things that are really, we think are important, that we really accomplishments we have done and are doing, pull them forward and pop them in the executive summary so that this bureaucrat will have it fresh on his mind. Other comments. I was thinking about the development of 41st Street. So we have a high density along 41st Street. That's a good corridor. There's a lot of reasons why we want to develop that. And it occurs to me that perhaps since we also have a rail trail activity going on, that we might suggest to the RTC or get it at least in their mind that maybe we could have a rail spur going down 41st Avenue, down the median. That would suddenly bring transportation to all the development we're getting. And I'm not saying that that's a necessarily practical idea, but if it's a trolley that can spin off of that and just put it in the RTC's mind that, hey, start looking at this. This could really help with our transportation needs and help with the low income people get around, get to Watsonville, get to Santa Cruz. So I thought that was at least something that we can maybe toss forward to the city council or the RTC and say, well, there's something we can do that's not just zoning. It's actually proactively getting an environment for low income housing. I was going through the document on numbers. I saw that on page 311, there was a reference to variance on height variance that went up to 50 feet. And that seemed to be inadequate to me, that especially if we're going to do a development on the mall, and we're going to go from 623 units to 850 units, and they want to have parking on site, that's, you know, we're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 stories. I don't know how high it's going to be, but we don't want to discourage that, right? And also we have the units on Park Avenue, which have higher density. Let's see, I have the page number on that, but it's the one that has 32 cubic DU per AC, 32.6. That's a 3-story. And so I'm sure those are over 50 feet as well. And I would think we would want to encourage the high density units. And so things like the 50 feet seem to be inconsistent with what we want to do as well. And then there was also on page 5-7. No, what was it on? Similar question on parking. Let's see. Yeah, page 312, table 312. There's a parking variance that which is another thing that might be needed to be updated, because again, on Capitola Road, we just approved something with minimal parking. I don't know whether that exceeds our parking variance or not, but we should go through this again and make sure that our numbers and our variances are large enough so that the big projects that are going to encourage density and low income housing meet those requirements. The other, I guess the rest of the questions are more in the typo kind of question. So I'll just leave it at that.
I think this is a great, comprehensive, long, exhaustive report. I especially like the provisions that you outlined with the homelessness and emergency services. I agree with emphasizing about the mall projections, but I think I think you've got a lot of it covered so far.
Okay, I'll email you a list of typos and things that I found in the document, so we don't take up time with that right now. But one of the comments I wanted to make is, I guess, in looking at the fees that we charge for someone to build a housing unit in Capitola right now, I was a little surprised that, before you could even put shovel in the ground, it's going to cost you basically $118,000 in fees to build a new residential unit. And one of the bigger fees in there is actually the affordable housing impact fee, which the city has adopted itself. And in going, and because I did read that ordinance today, because I was a little interested in it, it seems like that particular fee is not going to generate a tremendous amount of money, because it talks about, new housing going in basically on a vacant lot. Because if you're tearing down a house and building a new house, the fee doesn't apply. Doing an addition, it, doesn't increase the square footage of the existing house more than 50%, it doesn't apply. I mean, there are all these exceptions in there, so I'm sort of scratching my head and going, how many times are we going to collect this fee? And then we don't collect any fees for, parks, transportation, administration, the list goes on. And while we probably don't want to do it at this point in time in this housing element because of our time constraints, it seems to me we ought to look hard at, what kind of fees we're charging, because that certainly has an impact on how many units get developed. And since we're going to have, additional units provided in town, we also want to make certain that our town provides services for those units. I mean, is it appropriate to, have a child care fee because we talk about, the problems that that has in child? Is it appropriate to have a parks fee? Because certainly with housing becoming more dense and less open space, parks and recreation are going to become, one of our key components. So I would just like to see, the city look at that idea in the future. And I would like to express, as everyone else has, thanking particularly our staff as well as the consultants on how well this whole process has gone. I mean, anyone who reads this document has to be impressed by the amount of information that's included in it, the thoughtfulness that's gone into it. And we really appreciate all of the work that you have done. So
We
anything-
appreciate that. And Veronica and Brett have been amazing and our staff. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of housing elements over the years, and this is certainly one of the better, thorough, more accurate ones I've seen in a long time. So is there anything else you need from us as a commission?
Nope, that's it. I really appreciate how much
Do you
time.
have one more comment you'd like to make?
At our last meeting, we talked about looking at a couple of sites that were was that what's the process in that, or is that
So we identified 2 sites. I've heard from both property owners that they're okay with us utilizing those sites. One is across the street from 4401 Capitola Road. The other is a sporting goods store that was on 41st Avenue. So the process there is it's really there'll be minimum interaction with the property owner. We'll get some input initially from them, but then it's really RRM will take the steps to kind of figure out with what we've developed in our housing element, what could fit on that site. So, and be able to show what, how it would fit on that site. Do you have anything to add to that, Brett? I think you're on mute, so.
Sorry about that. Yes, that's a good assessment. We're working with our architecture team on the concepts that are in line with the projected units and the housing element constraints and programs.
We're realizing with our contract, with all the work that's going into this, there's definitely there's more work than they anticipated. So I would like to understand how important those build out scenarios are to the Planning Commission to keep this in budget. We could possibly just do one site so that because we're just, or if you'd like the 2 sites, I think I need to go back to City Council to ask for a little more money to keep us within budget. So is there a
I'm not sure if we can follow the
yeah, so this is one of those, this was kind of an optional item when it wasn't part of the scope when we had put it out for bid, but RM included this in their work and they're known for their design and this is a big component of what they do. So I thought it was important for the public to kind of see how projects could be built out and how this density could be achieved on a site. But as we're going through this process, I've asked them to do extra hearings because I think it's really important that we have Veronica and Brett at these meetings. So the budget for this, we're starting to go a little bit beyond the budget because of additional needs. So we've had one amendment made in order to do that joint session with the Planning Commission and City Council, which was a great meeting, but there's some items that we're realizing that for all these public hearings, it's really important to have the whole team present. And so we can either like stay on budget and remove one of the two build out scenarios, or I can go to city council and talk about this project and possible need for more funding.
So for,
My
So-
recollection was that we were unanimously all in favor of the one site of the old Outdoor World location. We had sort of split opinions on what the second site would be. So for me personally, I would be fine with doing the one that we all sort of agreed we wanted to do. I don't think there's a need to do two, but
I think
would that keep us on budget then if we had just one?
I'll need to talk with them about it, but that was one idea I had of maybe if we cut one of those out, we can save a little money there. So
I can agree to that.
I agree. I think that would be really illustrative to see such a, especially a project that's been discussed before, see how the density would apply to, specific site.
I'll pursue that avenue and see. Yep. And with that, I don't think we have anything else for you on that subject matter.
and
So-
we don't take any action tonight, so
Can I ask one more,
let's receive our comments.
can I ask one more question, Katie?
Sure.
Last meeting, you were asking if we found any additional sites, potential sites. If they're, I mean, given it's not a big vacant lot or a vacant commercial building, say it's a currently occupied space, are those still fair game?
They are, if they're like recently redeveloped or if they have multiple
Remodeled or-
stories, they maybe not.
Okay.
So it has to be one that's feasible, but if you have some, please email me and let me know and we'll take a look.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for everybody. Okay, so we'll move on to the director.
Okay, I have a few updates for you. First update, which is kind of the biggest news, is the rent control ordinance was passed. There was an emergency ordinance passed at City Council last week, and we also are doing a regular ordinance with a first and second reading, and the second reading will happen next week. So if you'd like, I can bring you an overview at some point. It was really a fast and furious effort to get that across the finish line because rents were expected to increase today at Cabrillo. But this isn't just written for Cabrillo, it applies citywide. So we're putting together right now kind of a cheat sheet on what the ordinance means for the residents of Capitola, and it'll be in English and Spanish, hoping to have that out possibly by the end of next week. So our city attorney's office is working on that. The other big update, I've had quite a few inquiries from Planning Commission in the past to keep you up to date on the Kaiser project, and they've actually withdrawn their application at this point. Kaiser has decided to refocus their energy into their existing locations and do improvements throughout the county and at existing buildings. So that project that was on the frontage road has now been withdrawn. We recently approved our first SB9 application. This is located at 204 Hollister, the small red buildings up on Depot Hill, that property. It's two properties. The property to the left sold previously and is going to be a single family home with an ADU. The property on the right, 204, brought in an SB9 project to subdivide the lot into two lots. And they're going to keep two of the units towards the front, and then redevelop and have a new duplex or two single lots up to 800 square feet towards the back. So it's interesting. We're going to learn a lot from this. And as we go through the process, it won't come to you for review, but I really want to show you some of the things we put in place and how it's affecting how they're going to build this. So that's interesting. On June 22nd at City Council, there's going to be a presentation on 1098 38th Avenue by Mid-Penn. They've bought a the piece of property next to the rail trail for affordable housing. And they're coming to the city council to ask for funding towards the planning of the project. And so I just wanted to make sure you're all aware of that and to tune in. It won't come to planning commission until we actually have either a conceptual review application or a review, but I think they'll give a glimpse of what they're thinking for the site. I think it's going to have a lot of be oriented towards the future rail trail, which is just 3 years out, it looks like. On July 20th, this is letting you know what's happening, what we're expecting. So this is when, at the time of year when we, because of July 4th, we're going to meet on the 3rd Thursday of the month in July. So that's July 20th, and in August, it'll be the same. We'll meet on the 3rd Thursday. But at the July 20th hearing, right now, we don't have much on the agenda. We have the color and materials board discussion. We got an indication of that tonight during the discussion on the outdoor dining of color materials. We have an application at 4805 Crystal, and this is for an ADU. Correct, Sean? 4805 Crystal is an ADU, in addition for an ADU, so that'll be coming to you. We also may have code enforcement for both Reef Dog and Castagnolas due to non-compliance with outdoor dining. So hopefully those will be in compliance and not on the agenda. And at this point, we're just unsure with the other projects because there's a lot of incomplete applications that we need things to come back in order to make it to a planning commission agenda. So with that, that concludes my report.
So now we go to commission comments.
Just one thing, I think I talked about in the last city council, last planning commission meeting. Are we able to talk about the issue with the obscured window? That it seems like every time, or was that ruled that
Oh.
it was a code issue?
It is a requirement of the code, but we can talk about it. We can definitely talk about it. It just might have to be an amendment to the code at a future time.
Yeah.
Yep.
If we could talk about that at the same time, that'd be great. Thank you.
I just had one comment I wanted to say. I've always thought being a planning commissioner is one of the more difficult jobs in the city because we are really, restricted by a whole lot of rules about how we look at projects, who we can talk to about a project, how that whole system works. And I think it's difficult because you have members of the community approach you or, we want to not appear that we're, bureaucrats who won't listen to any modification or any change. And I have come to recognize over the years that one of the reasons those rules are there is that we really do need to treat every applicant the same way. Every business in the village needs to be treated with the same respect and all of it. So I apologize if you think, not letting the guy from the Yale place talk or, our inability to deal with the Reef Dog issue. It's just that if we are going to follow the Brown Act and follow the rules, which I think that we need to do, that's just the way it is.
I would have had to recuse myself from the Reef Dog discussion anyway. I gotta remember that.
So anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate your leadership on that. I mean, in advising us on when we should be discussing things and when we shouldn't.
I mean, it's hard, but we got to follow the rules. All right, with that, our meeting is adjourned and we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you.